They laughed when the orphan inherited a worthless cave, until a Navy SEAL and his K9 uncovered the secret buried inside it. When I left the orphanage, a Navy SEAL and his dog inherited a worthless cave. On the coldest night of my life, I walked out of the orphanage with a trash bag and nowhere to go, except for a piece of land nobody wanted. But somewhere in the Montana mountains, a retired Navy SEAL and his loyal K9 were about to cross my path, and the cave everyone mocked was hiding a truth powerful enough to shake an entire town. Comment 1 if you'd keep digging for the truth, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell us where you're watching from. The clock in the hallway struck midnight with a dull metallic clang that echoed through the aging halls of the Red River Orphan Center. Outside, November wind pushed dry snow across the empty streets of Pine Hollow, Montana. The town was already asleep beneath the cold sky, but inside the old brick building, 18-year-old Lucas Carter stood beside a narrow bed that was no longer his. The dormitory smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. Most of the younger boys were asleep, curled beneath thin blankets. Lucas stood quietly in the dim light, stuffing the last of his belongings into a black plastic trash bag. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a worn photograph of parents he barely remembered. 12 years of life reduced to a bag that could tear if he pulled too hard. Behind him, the dormitory door creaked open. Mrs. Helen Grady stepped inside with the stiff authority of someone who had spent decades enforcing rules that had long stopped feeling humane. Her gray coat hung sharply over her shoulders, and her thin lips were pressed into a line that showed no warmth tonight. "Well," she said flatly, tapping the clipboard in her hand. "Midnight exactly." Lucas didn't answer. He tied the trash bag slowly. Mrs. Grady glanced down at the paper. Lucas Carter, 18 years old as of 12 a.m. State support officially ended 1 minute ago. Her voice had the tone of someone reading weather reports. Lucas swallowed. His throat felt dry. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "can I stay until morning? Just until the buses start running." Mrs. Grady shook her head immediately. "Rules are rules." Outside, the wind rattled the old window frame. "You're legally an adult now," she continued. "Beds here are for children." Lucas lowered his eyes. He had known this moment was coming. Every foster kid did. The day you turned 18 wasn't a birthday. It was an expiration date. Mrs. Grady reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. "Oh, one more thing," she said, tossing it onto the mattress. The envelope landed with a soft thud. "Came yesterday afternoon. Legal delivery." Lucas stared at it. "Legal?" Mrs. Grady shrugged. "Something about family property. Apparently your grandfather died months ago." Lucas blinked in confusion. "I don't have a grandfather." "Seems you did," she replied dryly. He picked up the envelope slowly. The paper was heavy, official. A law office stamp was printed in the corner. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a folded document and a letter. He read the top line twice before it made sense. Property deed, Timberfall Hollow, Carbon County, Montana. 3 acres. A cave. Lucas frowned. "What is Timberfall Hollow?" he asked. Mrs. Grady let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, that." She leaned against the doorframe. "Just a useless rock slope up in the Beartooth Mountains. Collapsed cave. Worthless land." Lucas looked down at the paper again. The legal description mentioned steep cliffs and a collapsed cavern sealed by a landslide decades ago. Mrs. Grady shook her head. "Some inheritance, huh?" Lucas said nothing. She crossed her arms. "Your grandfather apparently believed that pile of rocks was important. Personally, I think the old man was crazy." Her eyes moved toward the trash bag in Lucas's hand. "Well, Congratulations. You're the proud owner of a hole in a mountain. The hallway clock ticked again. Mrs. Grady straightened. Time to go, Lucas. He lifted the trash bag over his shoulder. The dormitory door opened into a long hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax. Lucas walked slowly toward the front entrance, his boots echoing softly against the tile floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. He passed the cafeteria, the recreation room, the small office where social workers had told him again and again that everything would work out someday. At the end of the hall, the double doors waited. Mrs. Grady unlocked them. Cold air rushed inside immediately. Snowflakes drifted through the yellow glow of the porch light. Lucas stepped outside. Behind him, the heavy doors closed with a final metallic click. For a moment, he just stood there. The orphanage looked different from this side of the door. The brick walls rose tall and silent, the windows glowing softly behind drawn curtains. Inside, the younger kids slept. Inside, it was warm. Lucas pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked down the empty road. Pine Hollow was a small town tucked between mountains and forest. At night, the streets felt deserted, the streetlights casting pale circles across the frozen pavement. His breath turned white in the cold air. The envelope crinkled in his hand. A cave. 3 acres. Worthless land. Lucas reached the edge of town where the highway began climbing into the dark mountains. He stopped beside the road and looked north. The Beartooth Mountains loomed like black shadows against the sky. Somewhere up there was Timberfall Hollow. Somewhere up there was the only thing in the world that belonged to him. Lucas adjusted the trash bag on his shoulder and began walking toward the mountains. He didn't know it yet, but before the night was over, that worthless cave would bring a Navy SEAL and his loyal K-9 into his life. And nothing in Pine Hollow would ever be the same again. Lucas Carter had been walking for nearly an hour. The highway leaving Pine Hollow stretched into the dark foothills of the Beartooth Mountains like a long black ribbon. Snow fell lightly now, whispering across the pavement under the dim glow of distant streetlights. His boots were thin, soaked from the slush along the shoulder of the road. Each step sent cold water through his socks. The trash bag dug into his shoulder. He kept walking anyway. There wasn't much choice. The town had ended 2 miles back, and the mountain highway ahead was empty except for the occasional gust of wind pushing snow across the asphalt. Lucas glanced at the envelope again. Timberfall Hollow. 3 acres. A collapsed cave. Worthless land. He let out a quiet breath that fogged the air in front of him. Well, he muttered softly to himself, it's still more than I had yesterday. The road curved slowly toward the mountains. Tall pine trees crowded the roadside, their branches heavy with fresh snow. The silence out here felt enormous. For the first time since leaving the orphanage, Lucas felt the weight of being truly alone. Then headlights appeared behind him. Lucas stiffened slightly and stepped farther onto the snowy shoulder. The sound of an engine grew louder. An old pickup truck approached slowly, its headlights cutting bright tunnels through the swirling snow. The vehicle rolled past him at first, tires crunching over the icy road. Lucas kept his head down, but 10 yards ahead the truck slowed. Then it stopped. For a moment the engine idled in the cold night air. Lucas hesitated. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out of the truck, pulling his heavy coat tighter against the wind. The porch light glow from the cab illuminated a face that looked weathered by years outdoors. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Strong build, quiet posture. The man studied Lucas carefully. You planning on walking all the way to Wyoming tonight? He asked. His voice was calm, deep, and steady. Lucas shook his head slightly. I'm just heading toward the mountains. The man glanced at the dark highway ahead. Mountains are 40 miles that way. Lucas shifted the trash bag on his shoulder. I've got time." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man turned slightly and looked back toward the truck. Inside the cab, a large German shepherd sat upright in the passenger seat. The dog was watching Lucas. Not barking, not growling, just watching. The man opened the passenger door. "Easy, Atlas." The dog stepped out slowly. Even in the dim light, Lucas could see the animal's size. The German shepherd was tall and muscular, with thick fur the color of dark copper and black steel. But it was the dog's eyes that caught Lucas's attention. Amber, sharp, alert. The dog approached Lucas calmly, nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Lucas froze. He had always liked dogs, but this one felt different. Not wild, not friendly in the usual way. Disciplined, like a soldier. Atlas stepped closer until his nose touched Lucas's gloved hand. The dog sniffed the fabric for a moment. Then something unexpected happened. Atlas gently pressed his head against Lucas's hand. Lucas blinked. The man noticed it too. "Well," he said quietly, "that's new." Lucas looked up. "What?" The man gave a faint half-smile. He doesn't usually introduce himself like that. Atlas sat beside Lucas now, calm but attentive. The man extended his hand. "Nathan Cole." Lucas hesitated before shaking it. "Lucas Carter." Nathan glanced at the trash bag, then back at Lucas. "Let me guess," he said gently. "You just turned 18. Lucas looked surprised. "How did you—" Nathan shrugged. "I grew up in towns like Pine Hollow." He nodded toward the envelope sticking out of Lucas's jacket pocket. "That paperwork looks like a deed." Lucas sighed. "Yeah, a cave." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "A cave?" "Timberfall Hollow." For the first time, Nathan's expression shifted slightly. "Up in the ridge?" Lucas nodded. Nathan looked toward the mountains again. Then he looked down at Atlas. The dog was still sitting beside Lucas, calm and steady. Nathan sighed quietly. "Well," he said, opening the truck door, "looks like Atlas already made the decision." Lucas frowned. "What decision?" Nathan nodded toward the passenger seat. "You need a ride." Lucas stared at him. "You don't even know me." Nathan shrugged again. "Atlas seems to." The dog wagged his tail once, slowly. Lucas hesitated. Trusting strangers was never easy for someone raised in the foster system. But the snow was falling harder now, and the mountains ahead were a long way away. Lucas climbed into the truck. Atlas immediately jumped onto the seat beside him, settling down like a guard. Nathan got back behind the wheel. The pickup rumbled forward, tires crunching over the icy highway as they climbed slowly toward the mountains. For several minutes, the truck moved through the snowy darkness without a word spoken. The heater hummed softly. Atlas rested his head on Lucas's knee. Lucas looked down at the dog. "He's different." Nathan nodded slightly. "He's a retired military K-9. Lucas looked up quickly. "Military?" "Yeah." Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "We were partners." Lucas studied him more closely now. "You were in the Army?" Nathan shook his head. "Navy." Lucas blinked. "A sailor?" Nathan gave a quiet chuckle. "Something like that." The road climbed higher into the mountains. Snow-covered pine trees crowded closer to the roadside. Atlas suddenly lifted his head. Nathan reached down and scratched the dog behind the ear. "Easy, partner." Lucas watched the two of them. "Looks like he still protects you." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Truth is," he said softly, "he protects me from more than people." Lucas didn't understand the meaning yet, but he would soon. The truck continued climbing toward the mountains, toward Timberfall Hollow, toward the cave that everyone said was worthless, toward a future none of them could yet imagine. The pickup truck climbed steadily into the Beartooth Mountains, its headlights carving pale tunnels through falling snow. The farther they drove from Pine Hollow, the quieter the world became. Lucas sat stiffly in the passenger seat, unsure what to say next. Atlas remained beside him, warm and steady, his head resting lightly against Lucas's knee. Every few minutes, the dog lifted his head and scanned the dark forest outside the window, as if guarding the road itself. Nathan Cole drove with the calm focus of someone who had spent years navigating dangerous terrain. After a long silence, Lucas glanced toward him. "You live up here?" Nathan nodded. "Cabin by Blackwater Lake. Few miles from Timberfall Hollow." Lucas looked out the window again. The mountains rose around them like enormous shadows. Tall pines bent under the weight of snow, their branches creaking softly in the wind. "It's quiet," Lucas said. Nathan gave a small nod. "That's the point." The road curved sharply around a cliffside. Below them, the valley disappeared into darkness. Atlas suddenly shifted. His ears lifted. Nathan noticed immediately. "What is it, partner?" Atlas gave a low huff, but relaxed again after a moment. Lucas watched the exchange. "You two really understand each other." Nathan allowed himself a faint smile. "Spent 7 years together overseas. You learn a lot about someone when your life depends on them." Lucas turned slightly. "Overseas where?" Nathan hesitated. For a moment, the only sound was the rumble of the engine and the wind brushing against the truck. "Afghanistan," Nathan said quietly. Lucas sat up straighter. "You were in combat?" Nathan's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Several tours." The truck passed beneath a row of tall pine trees that briefly blocked the moonlight. Lucas noticed something change in Nathan's posture. His shoulders stiffened slightly, his eyes narrowing as if he were suddenly looking at something far away. Atlas sensed it too. The dog lifted his head and nudged Nathan's arm gently. Nathan blinked. The tension in his shoulders eased. Lucas watched carefully. "What happened?" Nathan exhaled slowly. "War doesn't stay overseas," he said. Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathan glanced toward Atlas. "Some things follow you home." Atlas rested his chin on the edge of the seat, watching Nathan with calm patience. Lucas understood then. "PTSD?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. Snow drifted across the windshield in soft white streaks. Finally, he nodded. "Some nights are worse than others." Lucas looked down at Atlas. "So he helps you?" Nathan's voice softened. "He saved my life more times than I can count. Out there and back here." The truck crested a ridge. Suddenly the forest opened, revealing a wide view of the mountains ahead. Lucas leaned forward slightly. Dark cliffs rose against the night sky, jagged and enormous. Nathan pointed toward a distant ridge barely visible through the snow. "That's Timberfall Hollow." Lucas stared. "That pile of rocks?" Nathan nodded. Landslide sealed the cave entrance back in the 80s. Whole mountain shifted. Lucas pulled the envelope from his pocket and unfolded the deed again. 3 acres, he muttered. "All of it up there." Nathan glanced at the paper. "Your grandfather ever mentioned the place?" Lucas shook his head. "I didn't even know I had a grandfather." The truck rolled slowly onto a narrow dirt road covered in snow. Pine trees crowded the path on both sides. Atlas lifted his head again, nose twitching. Nathan slowed the truck. "What is it, Atlas?" The dog stared toward the dark woods. After a moment, he relaxed. Nathan continued driving. Lucas noticed the careful way Nathan scanned the forest as they moved. "You still act like you're on patrol." Nathan chuckled softly. "Old habits." They drove for another mile before the road ended at a small clearing. Nathan shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous. "This is as far as the truck goes," Nathan said. Lucas stepped out into the snow. Cold air rushed over him immediately. Atlas jumped down beside him. The dog stretched, then looked toward the mountains ahead. Nathan grabbed a flashlight from the truck and switched it on. The beam cut through the falling snow. "Come on," he said. They walked through the forest for nearly 10 minutes. Lucas followed the beam of Nathan's flashlight, climbing slowly up a steep slope covered in rocks and frozen soil. Finally, the trees opened. Lucas stopped. Before them stood a massive wall of gray limestone boulders piled against the side of the mountain. Some rocks were as large as pickup trucks. Others were buried halfway beneath the earth. The entire slope looked like the mountain had simply collapsed. Nathan swept the flashlight across the rubble. Timberfall Hollow. Lucas stared. That's the cave? Or what used to be the entrance? Snow drifted between the rocks. The place felt ancient and silent. Lucas walked forward slowly. "This is it," he said quietly. "My entire inheritance." Nathan watched him carefully. Lucas kicked a small stone across the frozen ground. "It's just rocks." Atlas suddenly barked. Lucas jumped slightly. The dog had moved toward the far side of the rock slide. Atlas sniffed intensely at a narrow crack between two large boulders. Then he began pawing at the ground. Nathan's expression sharpened. "That's interesting." Lucas walked over. "What is he doing?" Atlas scratched harder, dirt and small stones flying behind him. The dog's tail was stiff with focus. Nathan crouched beside him. "What do you smell, partner?" Atlas barked again. Nathan leaned closer to the crack. The flashlight beam revealed a narrow gap between the rocks. Cold air drifted from somewhere inside. Lucas frowned. "Is that a hole?" Nathan ran his fingers along the edge of the rock. "Maybe." Atlas continued digging with determined energy. Nathan stood slowly. "That dog doesn't waste effort," he said. Lucas felt a strange flicker of curiosity. "You think there's something inside?" Nathan studied the rocks again. "Maybe." The wind swept across the mountain ridge. Snowflakes danced in the flashlight beam. Lucas looked around at the silent wilderness. Then back at the crack Atlas was digging. For the first time since receiving the deed, he wondered something new. Maybe the cave wasn't worthless after all, and somewhere deep beneath the rockslide, the mountain seemed to be waiting. Atlas kept digging. Snow scattered behind his paws as he clawed at the narrow gap between two boulders. The German shepherd worked with focused determination, as if the rocks in front of him were only a temporary inconvenience. Nathan watched carefully, arms folded across his chest. Lucas stood beside him, breath fogging in the cold air. "You think he smells something?" Lucas asked. Nathan nodded slowly. Atlas was trained to detect explosives, weapons, human scent, even buried equipment. If he's digging like that, something's there. Lucas stepped closer to the crack in the rockslide. The narrow opening was barely wide enough to slide a hand inside. Cold air seeped from the darkness beyond. Lucas pressed his palm against the stone. The rock felt older than anything he had ever touched. Solid. Immovable. "So what do we do?" he asked. Nathan studied the surrounding boulders. "For tonight?" He glanced at the sky. "We go home." Lucas frowned. "Home?" Nathan pointed toward the forest below. "My cabin's about 2 miles down the ridge." Lucas hesitated. "I don't want to impose." Nathan shrugged. "You're not imposing." He looked down at Atlas, who was still digging stubbornly. "You're also not surviving a mountain snowstorm in a thin jacket." Lucas glanced at the sky. The snowfall was thickening. Wind pushed through the trees in long, cold breaths. Atlas finally stopped digging and stepped back from the rocks. He looked at Nathan, then at Lucas. Nathan rubbed the dog's head. "Good work, partner." Lucas took one last look at the rock slide. The mountain stood silent. But something about the crack Atlas had found lingered in his mind. Something hidden. Something waiting. They began the hike back down the ridge. The forest seemed darker now, the snow falling heavier between the branches. Nathan moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had walked these trails hundreds of times. Atlas stayed close beside Lucas. The dog never wandered far. Lucas noticed that. "He stays near me," Lucas said. Nathan glanced over his shoulder. "He's watching you." "Why?" Nathan gave a small smile. "Atlas has a habit of protecting people who look lost." Lucas wasn't sure if that was a joke. They reached the cabin nearly 20 minutes later. It stood near the edge of a frozen lake, a simple wooden structure surrounded by tall pines. Smoke drifted slowly from a metal chimney. Nathan unlocked the door and stepped inside. Warm air greeted them immediately. Lucas exhaled in relief. Wow. The cabin was small but comfortable. A wood stove crackled softly in the corner, casting orange light across rough timber walls. Atlas walked in and immediately circled once before lying down near the stove. Nathan hung his coat by the door. "You can take the couch." Lucas looked around. "You sure?" Nathan nodded. "Plenty of blankets." Lucas set his trash bag down and sank onto the couch. The warmth of the cabin slowly began melting the cold from his bones. Nathan poured 2 mugs of hot coffee and handed one to Lucas. "Drink." Lucas wrapped his hands around the mug. "Thanks." They sat quietly for a few minutes. The wind outside brushed against the cabin walls. Atlas slept with one ear slightly raised. Lucas finally spoke. "You ever wonder how life ends up like this?" Nathan looked over. "Like what?" Lucas gestured vaguely. "Midnight birthday, snowstorm, random cave." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Life rarely gives people clean starts." Lucas stared into his coffee. "I didn't expect to meet a Navy SEAL tonight." Nathan chuckled softly. "I didn't expect to pick up a hitchhiker with a cave." Lucas smiled faintly. For a moment, the room felt peaceful. Then Atlas lifted his head suddenly. The dog's ears stood straight. Nathan noticed immediately. "What is it?" Atlas stood and walked toward the cabin door. Low growl. Nathan set his mug down slowly. Lucas frowned. "What's wrong?" Nathan moved quietly to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Headlights moved through the forest. Lucas sat up. "Who would be driving up here?" Nathan didn't answer. The lights grew brighter. A black SUV rolled slowly into the clearing beside the cabin. The engine shut off. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his chest. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing an expensive coat and polished shoes that clearly didn't belong in mountain snow. Another man followed behind him. Lucas whispered, "Do you know them?" Nathan's expression hardened. "No." Atlas stood beside the door now, silent but tense. The stranger walked toward the cabin. His shoes crunched over the snow. Then he knocked. 3 slow taps. Nathan opened the door halfway. "Yes?" The man smiled politely. "Good evening." His voice was smooth, confident. "My name is Victor Langford." Nathan didn't move. "What do you want?" Langford glanced inside the cabin. His eyes landed on Lucas. "There he is." Lucas stiffened. Langford smiled wider. "I've been looking for you, Lucas Carter." Lucas blinked. "You know me?" Langford stepped closer, brushing snow from his coat. Word travels quickly in small towns. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. I understand you recently inherited a property. Lucas glanced at Nathan. Langford continued smoothly. Timberfall Hollow. Lucas said nothing. Langford smiled again. I'd like to buy it. Nathan crossed his arms. Why? Langford shrugged casually. It's simply a piece of land I'd like to add to my development project. Lucas frowned. What project? Langford's eyes gleamed slightly. A luxury mountain resort. He pulled a check from his pocket and held it out. $2,000. Lucas stared at the paper. $2,000. For a cave everyone said was worthless. Nathan watched Langford carefully. Atlas stepped forward beside him. The dog's growl was quiet, but unmistakable. Nathan spoke calmly. That dog doesn't like you. Langford glanced down at Atlas, then back up. He smiled politely. Dogs can be unpredictable. Atlas's growl deepened. Nathan didn't take the check. Lucas slowly asked, Why pay that much for a collapsed cave? Langford's smile held, but his eyes grew colder. Let's just say, he replied smoothly, some land is more valuable than people realize. The cabin fell silent. Outside, snow continued to fall across the mountain, and deep beneath the rock slide at Timberfall Hollow, something hidden waited patiently in the darkness. Victor Langford's polished smile lingered for only a moment longer. When Nathan didn't reach for the check, the developer slowly slipped it back into his coat pocket. Well, Langford said lightly, no rush. Think it over. His eyes drifted across the cabin, measuring every corner like a man evaluating property. Then he nodded toward Lucas. I'll double the offer if you call me tomorrow. Lucas stared at him. Why? Langford's smile returned. Because timing is everything in business. Atlas's low growl filled the doorway again. Langford looked down at the dog. For the first time, something like irritation flickered in his eyes. You should keep that animal under control, he said. Nathan's voice remained calm. He is. For a few seconds, no one moved. Snowflakes drifted past the open door. Langford finally turned away. Good night, gentlemen. He walked back toward the SUV, his expensive shoes crunching across the frozen snow. The engine started moments later. Headlights swept across the trees. Then the vehicle disappeared down the narrow road into the forest. Nathan closed the cabin door. Lucas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was strange. Nathan nodded. Yes. Lucas looked toward the window. $2,000 for a cave full of rocks. Nathan crossed the room and poured more coffee into his mug. That wasn't about rocks. Lucas leaned forward. Then what? Nathan glanced at Atlas. The German shepherd was still staring at the door. He wants something buried up there. Lucas felt a chill run through him. What kind of thing? Nathan shrugged. That's what we're going to find out. The storm worsened overnight. Wind rattled the cabin windows while snow piled high outside. Lucas slept deeply for the first time in weeks. But Atlas didn't. At around 2 a.m, the dog began pacing, soft whining. Nathan woke instantly. Years of combat had trained his body to wake at the slightest disturbance. He sat up in the dim cabin light. What is it, Atlas? The German shepherd moved to the door again, his nose pressed against the wood. Whine. Nathan stood and pulled on his boots. Lucas stirred on the couch. What's going on? Nathan opened the door slightly. Cold air rushed in. Atlas bolted outside. Lucas sat up quickly. Where's he going? Nathan grabbed his flashlight. Back to the cave. Lucas blinked. At 2 in the morning? Nathan looked toward the mountain ridge barely visible through the snowstorm. Dogs don't lose sleep for nothing. Lucas pulled on his jacket. I'm coming. Nathan didn't argue. The climb up the mountain was harder in the storm. Snow covered the trail, and wind pushed against them with sharp bursts of icy air. Atlas ran ahead through the darkness, pausing every few yards to make sure they were following. Nathan moved steadily, his flashlight beam cutting through the swirling snow. Lucas struggled to keep up. Your dog's determined. Nathan nodded. He's trying to show us something. After nearly 20 minutes, the rockslide appeared again through the storm. Atlas was already there. The German shepherd stood at the crack in the rocks, barking sharply. Nathan approached. What did you find, partner? Atlas immediately began digging again, faster than before. Snow and dirt scattered across the frozen ground. Lucas knelt beside the dog. He's really going at it. Nathan examined the rocks carefully. The narrow gap Atlas had discovered earlier was wider now. Stormwater had softened the soil around the boulders. Lucas pressed his hand against the stone again. This time he felt something different. A faint vibration. What is that? Nathan leaned closer. A low rumble echoed from deep within the mountain. Suddenly Atlas barked loudly. The ground shifted beneath their feet. Nathan grabbed Lucas's arm. Back up! They stepped away just as a section of loose rock collapsed inward. A loud crack echoed across the ridge. Dust and gravel poured into the opening. Then silence returned. Lucas stared. The rockslide had shifted. Where the crack once stood was now a dark hole nearly 3 feet wide. Cold air rushed upward from the depths below. Lucas swallowed. That wasn't there before. Nathan shined his flashlight into the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness. Deep darkness. Atlas barked again and stepped toward the hole. Nathan grabbed the dog's collar. Easy. Lucas leaned closer. The opening dropped straight down, a vertical shaft carved through the rock. How deep is that? Nathan tossed a small stone inside. They listened. 1 second. 2. 3. Clack. Lucas's eyes widened. That's far. Nathan's expression had changed. The calm mountain man was gone. Now Lucas saw something else in his eyes. The quiet alertness of a trained soldier. This isn't a natural cave collapse, Nathan said quietly. Lucas looked at him. What do you mean? Nathan pointed the flashlight deeper into the shaft. The beam caught something below, smooth, flat, not stone, concrete. Lucas felt his pulse quicken. Concrete? Nathan nodded slowly. Yeah. Atlas gave another short bark. Nathan looked at the dog. You smell people down there? Atlas wagged his tail once. Nathan turned back to Lucas. Well, kid. Lucas stared into the darkness. What? Nathan gave a faint smile. I think your worthless cave just got interesting. The wind howled across the mountain ridge, and somewhere far below their feet, hidden beneath decades of rock and silence, a forgotten secret was waiting to be discovered. Lucas knelt at the edge of the opening and stared down into the darkness. The beam of Nathan's flashlight reached only part way before vanishing into black. Concrete, Lucas repeated quietly. Nathan crouched beside him. Yeah. Atlas sat close to the edge, ears forward, alert but controlled. His nose twitched as if the cold air rising from the shaft carried stories from far below. Lucas felt the strange pull of curiosity growing stronger. So, someone built something down there? Nathan nodded slowly. Looks like it. Lucas leaned back slightly and rubbed his hands together to fight the cold. What do we do? Nathan stood and looked around the ridge. Snow still fell across the mountain, though the storm had begun to weaken. "We go down." Lucas blinked. "Down?" Nathan glanced at him. "You inherited it." Lucas looked at the hole again. "Yeah, but I didn't inherit a ladder." Nathan gave a faint smile. "Stay here." He moved toward a nearby pine tree and pulled a coil of rope from his pack. Lucas hadn't noticed the pack before. "You carry climbing gear everywhere?" Lucas asked. Nathan shrugged. "Mountain life." Atlas watched carefully as Nathan secured the rope around a thick tree trunk. Nathan tested the knot twice, pulling hard with both hands. Then he shined the flashlight down the shaft again. "About 15 feet. Lucas looked nervous. "That's still far." Nathan clipped the rope to his harness. "I'll go first." Atlas immediately stood. Nathan crouched and held the dog's face gently. "Stay." Atlas whined quietly. Nathan smiled. "I know, partner. Just a minute." Lucas watched as Nathan lowered himself carefully into the shaft. The rope creaked slightly against the rock. Nathan descended slowly until his boots finally touched the floor below. His voice echoed upward. "Solid ground." Lucas leaned over the edge. "What's it look like?" Nathan's flashlight beam moved across the darkness below. Concrete walls, metal shelves, dust-covered crates. Nathan looked up. "You'd better come see this." Lucas swallowed. He grabbed the rope. Atlas sat beside him, watching closely. Lucas lowered himself slowly into the shaft, his boots scraping against rough stone. Cold air wrapped around him as he descended. A few seconds later, his feet touched solid ground. Lucas looked around. His jaw dropped. The space was enormous. They stood inside a wide underground chamber built entirely from reinforced concrete. Thick support beams ran across the ceiling. Old industrial lights hung overhead, though none were working. The room smelled faintly of metal, oil, and dust. Lucas turned slowly. "What is this place?" Nathan moved the flashlight across the walls. Rows of heavy steel shelves lined the bunker. Large plastic containers sat stacked neatly beside wooden crates. Atlas jumped down beside them and immediately began exploring, moving carefully between the storage racks like he had done this his whole life. Nathan examined one of the crates. "Military supplies." Lucas stepped closer. Inside were sealed boxes labeled with faded government markings. Emergency rations, medical kits, water containers. Lucas stared. "This looks like survival stuff." Nathan nodded. "Cold War bunker." Lucas blinked. "A bunker?" Nathan shined the light deeper into the room. "At least that's what it looks like." Atlas barked once. The dog had moved toward the far end of the chamber. Nathan and Lucas followed. Two large objects stood beneath heavy canvas tarps. Nathan grabbed the edge of the first tarp. "You ready?" Lucas nodded slowly. Nathan pulled it back. Dust filled the air. Beneath the tarp sat an old military jeep in near-perfect condition. Lucas gasped. "That's real?" Nathan ran his hand across the hood. "Looks like it hasn't moved in 30 years. Lucas turned in amazement. "You're telling me my grandfather hid all of this under a cave?" Nathan didn't answer. His flashlight had found something else. A wooden desk stood in the corner of the bunker. On top of it sat a typewriter, stacks of paper, and a single envelope. Nathan walked toward it slowly. Lucas followed. Nathan picked up the envelope and brushed away the dust. Written across the front in faded ink were two simple words. Lucas Carter. Lucas froze. "That's my name." Nathan handed it to him. Lucas's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, old, yellowed. Lucas began reading silently. Nathan watched his face carefully. Lucas's eyes moved quickly across the page. Then he stopped. His expression changed. Shock, confusion, then anger. Nathan spoke quietly. "What does it say?" Lucas lowered the letter slowly. "My grandfather built this bunker." Nathan nodded. "That part makes sense." Lucas's voice shook slightly. "But that's not why he built it." Nathan stepped closer. "Then why?" Lucas looked up. "To hide evidence." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Evidence of what?" Lucas swallowed. "My parents didn't die in an accident." The bunker felt suddenly colder. Nathan said nothing. Lucas continued reading the letter. Then he whispered the words that changed everything. "They were murdered." Atlas barked sharply. The sound echoed through the silent underground chamber. Nathan looked around the bunker again. The supplies, the vehicles, the files. Then he looked back at Lucas. "What kind of evidence did your grandfather hide down here?" Lucas lifted the letter again. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Proof that a powerful company poisoned the town's water supply." Nathan's jaw tightened. Lucas finished the sentence. "And the man who runs that company," he looked toward the cave entrance above them, "is Victor Langford." For a moment, neither Lucas nor Nathan moved. The wind far above the mountain drifted faintly through the shaft, carrying soft echoes into the bunker. Atlas stood between them, ears raised, sensing the shift in the air. Nathan finally spoke. "Start from the beginning." Lucas nodded slowly and unfolded the rest of the letter. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he read aloud. "Lucas, if you are reading this, it means I failed to keep you safe long enough to tell you the truth myself." Nathan crossed his arms, listening carefully. Lucas continued. "My name is Daniel Carter, your grandfather. For 20 years I worked as a geologist for Langford Resource Development." Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. Lucas kept reading. "At first, I believed we were building energy infrastructure for the region. But in 1997 I discovered the truth. The company had been secretly dumping industrial chemicals into a series of natural caverns beneath Timberfall Hollow." Nathan glanced around the bunker again. Lucas's voice grew quieter. "The caverns connect directly to the aquifer that supplies drinking water to Pine Hollow and several surrounding towns." Nathan muttered under his breath. "That explains the bunker." Lucas continued reading. "When I realized the contamination was spreading, I gathered evidence. Soil samples, water analysis, company records, and transport logs." Lucas looked toward the stacks of filing cabinets along the bunker walls. Nathan followed his gaze. "Your grandfather kept it all." Lucas nodded. "But Langford found out someone was investigating." Nathan's expression hardened. Lucas swallowed before continuing. "Your parents were environmental lawyers. When they learned what I had discovered, they prepared to file a federal lawsuit against Langford Resource Development." Atlas gave a quiet whine. Lucas's voice trembled slightly. "But before they could submit the evidence, their car crashed on a mountain road outside Bozeman." Nathan said quietly, "The accident." Lucas nodded slowly. "My grandfather wrote that the brakes had been tampered with." The bunker fell silent. Nathan rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "And the investigation?" "Closed," Lucas said. Nathan shook his head. "Of course it was." Lucas lowered the letter briefly. "My grandfather knew he was next." Nathan looked around the bunker again, seeing it differently now. "Which is why he built this." Lucas nodded. "He used his savings and some military surplus contractors to build the bunker secretly inside the cave system." Nathan stepped toward one of the metal filing cabinets and pulled it open. Inside were rows of carefully labeled folders, water test reports, corporate invoices, Shipping manifests. Atlas walked beside him, sniffing the edges of the cabinet. Nathan pulled out a thick binder. Your grandfather didn't just collect evidence. Lucas watched him flip through the pages. He documented everything. Lucas lifted the letter again. There's more. Nathan looked up. Lucas read the final section. I triggered the rockslide that sealed this cave entrance 15 years ago. It was the only way to protect the evidence until someone could safely expose the truth. Nathan looked toward the shaft above them. Smart man. Lucas finished the letter quietly. If Langford learns the bunker exists, he will destroy the evidence and anyone who stands in his way. Be careful, Lucas. Trust only those who stand beside you when everything else is gone. Lucas lowered the paper. Silence settled over the bunker. Atlas walked back to Lucas and sat beside him. Nathan leaned against the desk. So Langford offered to buy your land. Lucas nodded. $2,000. Nathan gave a humorless smile. That explains the sudden interest. Lucas looked at the rows of documents. All of this could expose him. Nathan closed the binder slowly. Yeah. Lucas asked quietly. What do we do now? Nathan was about to answer when Atlas suddenly growled. The German shepherd's body stiffened. His ears turned toward the shaft above. Nathan looked up immediately. What is it? Atlas moved toward the opening. A distant sound echoed faintly down the shaft. Lucas listened. At first he heard nothing. Then, the rumble of engines. Nathan's expression darkened. That's not good. Lucas stepped closer to the shaft. How many? Nathan turned off the flashlight for a moment. They listened carefully. More than one vehicle. Lucas's voice dropped to a whisper. You think Langford came back? Nathan nodded slowly. He's not the kind of man who waits long for answers. Atlas barked once, sharp and alert. Nathan grabbed the flashlight again. Lucas! Lucas looked up. We're not alone on this mountain anymore. Above them, headlights moved across the snow-covered ridge, and the hunt for the truth had just begun. Nathan killed the flashlight instantly. The bunker dropped into darkness. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. Only the faint gray light from the shaft above outlined the opening in the ceiling. Atlas stood perfectly still beside Nathan. The dog's ears were locked toward the sound above. Engines. More than one. Nathan spoke quietly. Stay low. Lucas crouched beside one of the steel shelves. The rumble of tires grew louder. Nathan stepped closer to the shaft and looked upward. Through the drifting snow, he could see beams of light sweeping across the rockslide. Vehicles had reached the ridge. Lucas whispered, How many? Nathan listened. At least 2 trucks. Atlas let out a low, warning growl. Nathan knelt and placed a calming hand on the dog's neck. Easy, partner. Footsteps crunched across the snow above them. Voices, muffled but clear enough. Lucas's stomach tightened. They're right above us. Nathan nodded. They're searching. Lucas felt his chest tighten. They know. Nathan's voice stayed calm. Maybe they're just checking the property. A man's voice echoed faintly down the shaft. Spread out. Lucas froze. Another voice answered. Langford said the cave entrance should be somewhere near the slide. Nathan's eyes darkened. Lucas whispered, They know. Nathan motioned for silence. Atlas lowered himself to the floor beside them, body tense but quiet. The footsteps moved across the rockslide. Metal clanged. Lucas realized they were using tools, shovels, crowbars. They were digging. Nathan leaned toward Lucas. If they open the shaft, we'll have company. Lucas swallowed. What do we do? Nathan's mind was already moving through possibilities. First rule, he whispered. Stay hidden. Lucas nodded. Atlas remained still, watching Nathan closely. The footsteps above shifted again. Then a sharp voice echoed down. "Hey!" Another man answered. "What?" "I found something." Lucas felt his chest tighten. The men were standing near the crack Atlas had widened earlier. Nathan slowly scanned the bunker. He spotted a narrow side hallway built into the concrete wall. "Lucas," he whispered. Lucas followed his gaze. "Move." They slipped quietly into the side corridor. Atlas padded silently behind them. Nathan kept the flashlight off. The corridor curved into a smaller storage room filled with crates and old equipment. Nathan closed the metal door halfway. They waited. Above them, the men were talking louder now. One of them shouted, "There's a hole here!" Lucas clenched his fists. Another voice responded, "How big?" "Big enough to drop a rope." Lucas looked at Nathan. Nathan stayed perfectly calm, but Lucas could see the tension in his shoulders. "Are they coming down?" Lucas whispered. Nathan shook his head slightly. "Not yet." Atlas's nose twitched. Nathan trusted that instinct more than any piece of technology. The dog suddenly stiffened. A quiet whine escaped his throat. Nathan frowned. "What is it?" Atlas moved closer to the bunker wall. He sniffed intensely at the concrete. Nathan followed him. Lucas watched as Nathan examined the wall carefully. There was a narrow metal panel hidden behind a shelf. Nathan brushed away dust. An old keypad sat beside the panel. Lucas whispered, "What's that?" Nathan studied it. "Emergency exit." Lucas blinked. "There's another way out?" Nathan nodded. "Your grandfather built this bunker to survive anything." Lucas looked toward the ceiling again. Above them, the voices were growing louder. Someone shouted, "Langford wants pictures!" Nathan typed a quick sequence on the keypad. Nothing happened. Lucas asked quietly, "Locked?" Nathan shook his head. "Probably needs power." Atlas suddenly barked. Nathan spun around. The metal door they had left partially closed rattled slightly. Lucas's eyes widened. Footsteps echoed down the main bunker hallway. Someone had entered the shaft. Nathan whispered sharply, "Move!" Lucas grabbed the letter from the desk and stuffed it into his jacket. Nathan pulled open one of the crates nearby. Inside were flashlights, batteries, and an old radio. Nathan tossed Lucas a flashlight. "Don't turn it on unless you have to." Atlas moved closer to Nathan's side. The dog's posture changed completely now. Not relaxed, not curious. Ready. The footsteps grew louder. A beam of light swept across the main chamber. A man's voice echoed through the bunker. "Someone's been down here." Lucas held his breath. Another voice answered, "Find them." Nathan crouched beside Atlas. The dog looked up at him. Nathan whispered softly, "Stay close." Lucas felt the weight of the moment pressing in. They weren't exploring a mystery anymore. Now they were being hunted. And somewhere above the bunker, Victor Langford was waiting for answers. Nathan leaned close to Lucas. "We're getting out of here." Lucas nodded. "But not empty-handed." Atlas let out a low growl. The hunt for the truth had turned into a race for survival. Nathan crouched beside the metal shelf, listening carefully. Footsteps echoed through the main bunker chamber. Heavy boots. 2 men. Maybe 3. Flashlight beams swept across the concrete walls outside the storage room. Lucas's breathing grew shallow. "They're going to find us," he whispered. Nathan shook his head slowly. "Not if we stay smart." Atlas stood silently beside him, muscles tense, amber eyes fixed toward the half-open door. Another voice echoed down the hallway. "Spread out." The beam of a flashlight briefly passed across the doorway before moving on. Nathan waited. 5 seconds. 10. When the light faded, he leaned toward Lucas. Listen carefully. Lucas nodded. Nathan spoke in the quiet voice of someone used to making decisions under pressure. We can't fight them, and we can't stay here. Lucas whispered, Then what? Nathan glanced toward the metal panel Atlas had found earlier. We leave. Lucas looked at the keypad again. You said it needs power. Nathan opened one of the nearby equipment crates and pulled out a portable battery pack. Old bunker systems often had manual backups. He examined the wiring behind the keypad. Lucas watched as Nathan connected the battery terminals with quick, practiced movements. You did this before? Lucas asked quietly. Nathan gave a faint smile. Different mountains. The keypad flickered. A small green light blinked on. Atlas wagged his tail once. Nathan typed a short code. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the metal wall beside them vibrated softly. A narrow section of concrete slid sideways with a heavy grinding sound. Behind it, a hidden tunnel stretched into darkness. Lucas stared. You're kidding. Nathan grabbed 2 flashlights and handed one to Lucas. Emergency exit. Atlas stepped forward and sniffed the tunnel carefully. Nathan clipped a small harness strap onto the dog's collar. Stay with me, partner. Footsteps echoed again from the main bunker room. A voice shouted, Check the side corridors. Lucas's heart jumped. Nathan pointed toward the tunnel. Go. Lucas stepped inside first. The tunnel sloped upward through rough stone reinforced with old steel beams. Nathan closed the hidden panel behind them. The grinding sound faded. The bunker and the men searching it disappeared behind a solid wall of rock. For several minutes, they climbed silently. The air grew colder. Lucas finally whispered, Where does this lead? Nathan checked the compass on his watch. North side of the ridge. Atlas moved ahead of them, guiding the path like he had done during combat missions. Lucas looked at the dog. He's incredible. Nathan nodded quietly. He saved my life once in Helmand Province. Lucas glanced at him. What happened? Nathan kept climbing. Ambush. Atlas's ears flicked at the word. Nathan continued. Enemy fighters had hidden along a narrow canyon trail. Atlas smelled them before we walked into the kill zone. Lucas looked at the dog again. So he warned you. Nathan smiled faintly. He did more than that. Lucas waited. Nathan's voice grew quieter. He pulled me behind a rock wall just seconds before the shooting started. Atlas looked back briefly, as if remembering. Lucas reached forward and rubbed the dog's shoulder. Good boy. Atlas's tail swished softly. After several more minutes of climbing, faint gray light appeared ahead. The tunnel ended at a small metal hatch. Nathan pushed it open slowly. Cold night air rushed in. They stepped out onto a narrow ledge overlooking the forest. The storm had almost passed. Snow still covered the mountains, but the wind had quieted. Lucas looked back toward the ridge where Timberfall Hollow lay. Faint beams of light still moved across the rockslide above the bunker. They're still searching. Nathan nodded. And they'll keep searching until they destroy that place. Lucas's voice tightened. They can't destroy the evidence. Nathan crouched beside him. That's why we're not done. Lucas looked at him. What do you mean? Nathan pulled the letter and one of the evidence folders from Lucas's jacket pocket. We take this to people Langford can't control. Lucas frowned. Like who? Nathan looked toward the distant valley where the highway lights of Pine Hollow glowed faintly. Federal investigators. Lucas felt hope rise for the first time since the bunker discovery. You know someone? Nathan nodded. Old teammate. Now works in Denver. Lucas exhaled. That's good. Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. But Langford will expect that. Lucas blinked. So what do we do? Nathan stood and looked back at the ridge. Instead of running, Atlas barked once beside him. Nathan finished the sentence calmly. We make him come to us. Lucas looked confused. How? Nathan gave a quiet, determined smile. We set a trap. Atlas's tail wagged slowly. The retired SEAL had stepped back into a battlefield, and this time, the mountain itself would be the battleground. Dawn crept slowly across the Beartooth Mountains. A pale gray light stretched over the frozen ridges and pine forests of Timberfall Hollow. Snow glowed softly in the early morning, covering the land in a quiet blanket that made the world seem peaceful. But the calm was an illusion. Nathan Cole stood near the rockslide above the bunker entrance, scanning the ridge through a pair of binoculars. Beside him, Atlas sat alert, tail resting against the snow, but eyes sharp and watchful. Lucas stood a few yards away, nerves tight in his chest. "You're sure this will work?" he asked quietly. Nathan lowered the binoculars. "If Langford believes he's about to lose control of that evidence, he'll come." Lucas looked toward the forest road below the ridge. "And if he doesn't?" Nathan shrugged. "Then we still have the proof." Lucas glanced down at the small recording device clipped inside his jacket. The federal agents had wired him less than an hour earlier. Nathan's old teammate had arrived before sunrise with a quiet team of investigators. They were hidden now throughout the surrounding forest, watching, waiting. Lucas swallowed. "I still don't like being the bait." Nathan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone." Atlas walked over and pressed his head gently against Lucas's leg. Lucas smiled faintly and scratched behind the dog's ear. "Guess I've got backup." Nathan's radio crackled softly. A quiet voice spoke. Movement on the access road. Nathan lifted the binoculars again. A black SUV climbed slowly up the mountain trail. Behind it followed 2 pickup trucks. Nathan exhaled. "Right on time." Lucas felt his pulse quicken. Atlas's ears lifted. The vehicles reached the clearing near the rockslide and stopped. Victor Langford stepped out of the SUV. Even in the cold mountain air, he wore the same expensive coat as before, his polished shoes standing out against the snow. 3 men followed him from the trucks. They looked less like construction workers and more like hired security. Langford spotted Lucas standing near the rockslide. A thin smile crossed his face. "Well," he called out, his voice echoing across the ridge. "Looks like you changed your mind." Lucas stepped forward slowly. "I'm ready to sell." Langford walked closer, brushing snow from his sleeves. "I knew you would come around." His eyes flicked briefly toward Nathan. "And you brought your mountain guide." Nathan remained silent, arms folded. Atlas stood beside him, muscles tense. Langford reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "Sign the deed, and the money is yours." Lucas didn't move. "Before I sign, I want to ask something." Langford raised an eyebrow. "Of course." Lucas pointed toward the rockslide. "You're offering thousands of dollars for a cave everyone says is worthless." Langford smiled thinly. "Development opportunity." Lucas held his ground. "Or evidence." The word hung in the cold air. Langford's smile faded slightly. "What are you talking about?" Lucas reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded letter from his grandfather. "My grandfather built a bunker under that cave." Nathan watched Langford carefully. For the first time, the developer's calm confidence shifted, just slightly. Lucas continued. "He left records." Langford's eyes hardened. "What kind of records?" Lucas stepped closer. "Proof your company dumped toxic chemicals into the caverns beneath this mountain." The silence that followed felt heavy. One of Langford's men shifted uncomfortably. Langford laughed softly. "You're a dramatic kid." Lucas didn't back down. "You poisoned the town's water supply." Nathan noticed Langford's jaw tighten. Lucas pressed further. "My parents were going to expose it." Langford's voice turned cold. "You should be careful with accusations." Lucas held the letter up. "You had them killed." Nathan saw it happen. The mask dropped. Langford's polite businessman expression vanished for just a second, and in its place appeared something darker. "You really did find the bunker," Langford said quietly. Lucas felt his heart pound. Nathan spoke for the first time. "Sounds like you just admitted it." Langford turned slowly toward him. "You think anyone will believe a washed-up soldier and a homeless orphan?" Atlas growled. Langford glanced at the dog. "Careful with that animal." Lucas lifted his voice slightly. "You came here to destroy the evidence." Langford smiled again, but it was a different smile now, colder. "Let's be honest, Lucas," he said. "That mountain was always going to be leveled for development." Nathan tapped the small transmitter clipped inside Lucas's jacket. Hidden agents listened to every word. Langford continued calmly. "A few old documents buried under rock aren't going to stop progress." Lucas stared at him. "You just confessed." Langford chuckled. "No." He gestured toward the rock slide. "I explained business." Then he turned toward his men. "Start the charges." Lucas's eyes widened. "What?" Two of the men began unloading equipment from the trucks. Nathan spoke into the radio clipped to his collar. "Now!" The forest exploded with movement. Federal agents rushed from the trees surrounding the ridge. "FBI! Nobody move!" Langford spun around in shock. His men froze as rifles and flashing badges surrounded them. Atlas barked loudly. Nathan stepped forward calmly. "Game's over." Agents moved quickly, securing the men and collecting the equipment. Langford stared at Lucas in disbelief. "You planned this." Lucas nodded. Nathan gestured toward the recording device. "And you said everything we needed." An agent placed handcuffs around Langford's wrists. Snow drifted quietly across the mountain ridge. Langford glared at Lucas. "You think this ends here?" Lucas looked back at him calmly. "No." He nodded toward the cave. "This is where it finally begins." Atlas barked once more as the agents escorted Langford toward the waiting vehicles. For the first time in decades, the mountain was about to reveal its truth. The ridge above Timberfall Hollow slowly returned to silence. Snow drifted gently across the clearing, while federal agents secured the equipment Langford's crew had brought to the mountain. Evidence bags, cameras, and sealed containers began replacing the shovels and explosive cases the men had unloaded only minutes earlier. Lucas stood near the rock slide, watching it all unfold. It still felt unreal. Just 12 hours earlier, he had been standing outside the orphanage with a trash bag and nowhere to go. Now the most powerful man in the county was being led down the mountain in handcuffs. Nathan stepped beside him. "You okay?" Lucas nodded slowly. "I think so." Atlas sat at Nathan's side, his watchful eyes following the agents as they moved around the ridge. One of the investigators approached them. He was a tall man in a dark winter jacket, with an FBI badge clipped to his belt. "Cole," Nathan shook his hand. "Good to see you again, Mike." Special Agent Michael Donovan smiled faintly. "Didn't expect my old teammate to drag me into a mountain conspiracy." Nathan nodded toward Lucas. "Kid found the truth." Donovan turned to Lucas. "You did something brave today." Lucas shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just read my grandfather's letter." Donovan looked toward the cave entrance. And thanks to that letter, we now have enough evidence to open a full federal investigation. Agents had already lowered ropes into the shaft. Teams were beginning to explore the bunker below. Nathan watched them carefully. They'll find everything. Donovan nodded. The documents your grandfather preserved are more than enough to start a criminal case. Lucas looked at the mountain again. My parents tried to stop Langford. Donovan's voice softened. And now you finished what they started. Lucas didn't know what to say. Atlas suddenly barked and trotted a few steps toward the edge of the ridge. Nathan followed. What is it, partner? Atlas sniffed the wind and then turned back, satisfied. Nathan smiled. False alarm. Donovan chuckled. That dog never relaxes. Nathan scratched behind Atlas's ears. He's still on duty. Below them, the valley began to wake. Pine Hollow sat quietly beneath the snow-covered hills, unaware that the truth buried beneath Timberfall Hollow was about to change the town forever. By midday, the story had already spread. News vans arrived on the access road. Helicopters circled above the ridge. Agents carefully removed boxes of documents from the bunker, sealing them inside evidence containers. Lucas watched as each crate surfaced from the shaft. Records, chemical reports, shipping logs, proof of decades of illegal dumping. Donovan joined them again near the ridge. This is bigger than we thought. Nathan folded his arms. How big? Donovan exhaled slowly. Langford Resource Development operated facilities across 3 states. Lucas frowned. So the dumping wasn't just here. No, Donovan said. It looks like Timberfall Hollow was the main disposal site. Nathan shook his head. All under the town's water supply. Donovan nodded grimly. That's why the evidence matters. Lucas watched the agents working below. What happens now? Donovan glanced toward the road, where Langford's SUV had been seized. Langford will face charges for environmental crimes, conspiracy, and obstruction. Lucas felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, closure. Nathan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. It's over. Lucas looked toward the ridge. Not completely. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Lucas nodded toward the cave. The mountain still needs to be cleaned. Donovan smiled slightly. Actually, that's already part of the plan. Lucas blinked. What? Donovan pointed toward the cluster of federal vehicles parked along the road. Once the investigation is complete, the Environmental Protection Agency will begin a full remediation project. Lucas watched the snow-covered forest stretching across the valley. They're going to fix it. Donovan nodded. It might take years. Nathan smiled faintly. But the truth is finally out. Atlas wagged his tail once. The dog seemed to sense the tension leaving Nathan's shoulders. For the first time since they had met, Lucas saw Nathan relax. Not completely, but enough. Lucas looked down at Atlas. You did good, soldier. Atlas barked once proudly. Nathan laughed quietly. He knows. The sun slowly broke through the clouds above the Beartooth Mountains. Light spread across the frozen valley below. Lucas watched it in silence. A new day was beginning, and for the first time in his life, the future didn't feel empty anymore. Winter slowly faded from the Beartooth Mountains over the following months. The heavy snows melted into streams that rushed through the forests surrounding Timberfall Hollow. The frozen lake beside Nathan's cabin thawed, its glassy surface breaking apart under the warming Montana sun. Lucas stood on the cabin porch one early spring morning, watching the mist rise from the water. It still amazed him how quickly life had changed. Atlas trotted across the clearing toward him, a stick clenched proudly in his jaws. Lucas laughed and took the stick. You never get tired of this game, do you? Atlas barked happily. Nathan stepped out of the cabin carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Some habits are worth keeping. Lucas accepted the mug and leaned against the porch railing. Down the road, a convoy of government vehicles rolled slowly toward the mountain ridge. Nathan nodded toward them. They're starting the cleanup today. Lucas watched the trucks disappear along the forest road. For weeks after Langford's arrest, federal investigators had continued exploring the bunker beneath Timberfall Hollow. The evidence had shaken the entire region. News outlets across the country reported the story. Environmental investigators confirmed what Lucas's grandfather had discovered decades earlier. The chemical dumping had poisoned underground water systems for years. But now the truth was public. Langford Resource Development had collapsed almost overnight. Lawsuits flooded the courts. Assets were frozen. Executives began turning on each other. And Victor Langford himself remained in federal custody awaiting trial. Lucas exhaled slowly. My grandfather kept that bunker hidden for 15 years. Nathan nodded. He knew someone would find it eventually. Lucas smiled faintly. I guess he just didn't know it would be me. Atlas dropped the stick at Nathan's feet. Nathan tossed it toward the open field. The German shepherd sprinted after it with the same focus he had once used on military missions. Lucas watched him run. You ever think about what he did for you? Nathan asked. Lucas looked over. What do you mean? Nathan nodded toward Atlas. That dog pulled you into something bigger than yourself. Lucas nodded slowly. Yeah. Atlas returned a moment later, panting happily. Lucas scratched the dog's neck. He saved both of us. Nathan didn't argue. The sound of a truck approaching along the dirt road drew their attention. A white government vehicle pulled into the clearing. Special Agent Donovan stepped out. He removed his sunglasses and walked toward the porch. Morning, gentlemen. Nathan greeted him with a nod. Morning. Donovan looked at Lucas. Thought you'd want to hear the latest. Lucas straightened slightly. What happened? Donovan leaned against the porch rail. Langford's company has officially filed for bankruptcy. Nathan let out a quiet whistle. That fast? Donovan nodded. The evidence from your bunker was overwhelming. Lucas felt a strange mixture of emotions. Justice, relief, and something quieter. Closure. Donovan continued. The courts also approved a large environmental settlement fund. Lucas frowned slightly. What does that mean? Donovan smiled. It means Timberfall Hollow is now protected federal land. Lucas looked toward the mountains. No development? No development, Donovan confirmed. Nathan chuckled softly. That mountain will finally get some peace. Donovan looked back at Lucas. There's something else. Lucas waited. Because the property was legally yours when the case started. Part of the settlement compensation goes to you. Lucas blinked. How much? Donovan shrugged. Enough to change a life. Lucas stared across the clearing for a moment. The mountains looked different now. Not threatening, not lonely, just quiet. Nathan spoke gently. So what are you going to do with it? Lucas smiled. I've been thinking about that. Atlas sat beside him again, tail brushing the wooden porch. Lucas scratched behind the dog's ears. First thing, I'm staying here for a while. Nathan raised an eyebrow. You sure? Lucas nodded. I spent my whole life without a home. He looked toward the forest. I think I finally found one. Nathan didn't say anything, but a small smile appeared on his face. Lucas continued. And eventually, he glanced toward Pine Hollow in the distance. I want to build something for kids who end up where I started. Nathan leaned back against the porch post. Like a ranch? Lucas nodded. Somewhere they can learn skills, work with animals, maybe train service dogs. Atlas barked once as if approving the idea. Nathan laughed. Looks like you already have your first instructor. Lucas rubbed the dog's head. Yeah. The wind moved gently through the pine trees. Sunlight warmed the clearing around the cabin. Lucas looked at the two figures beside him. A former Navy SEAL and a loyal military K-9. They had entered his life on the coldest night he could remember, and somehow, without planning it, they had become something he had never truly had before. Family. Nathan raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. Lucas lifted his own mug. To family. Atlas barked proudly, and high above them, the mountains of Timberfall Hollow stood silent at last, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked wide open. The truth had been spoken, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked wide open. If you believe loyalty like Atlas showed still matters in this world, comment loyalty below. And if stories about courage, justice, and standing your ground mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.